Ben Cosgrove, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, it was great hearing your work and getting to experience the beauty of your work at a dear friend's wedding, Alan and Maki's wedding. It was essentially, I think, like sanctified by your music. So I'm excited to ask you the question that I already know the answer to. But Ben, what is your job?
I'm a traveling composer and piano player. So I go from town to town. I write and play instrumental music, but my sort of animating gimmick is that I write music inspired by landscape and place. So I'm really, really interested in geography and have kind of managed to, for the last 10 years, write music about what it feels like to be a human-sized person in different landscapes. And it gives me an excuse to talk to people about that every night, which is, I guess, what I really want more than even the piano playing of it.
See, that's so interesting to me because I think it foreshadows a lot of the themes that I'm excited to cover with you in the conversation that are the intersection between geometry, music, and the human experience as a human-sized person in a given place. And it's like we have this native intuition about what a landscape painter is, like you go to a place with a nice view and you capture a visual image of it. But I think what you do is really interesting because you sort of like adapt that experience, but turn it into music and you turn it into sound. And, the great mystery of music is how can sound evoke the same experience as something else, right? Like something, another kind of experience.
Yeah.
So I guess I have to ask the following question is how did you fall into that track, I guess? Like, how did you find that?
Well, I guess I'm not sure how far back you want me to go. When I was really little, that was when I started playing piano, and I had my piano teacher throughout my childhood was this really, really wonderful person who she gave me a really long leash and kind of encouraged me on all of my like quixotic musical pursuits that I might I'd come in with like a song I had heard in the radio and I'd want to learn how that went. And she was always very encouraging about I started kind of like writing music when I was pretty little, and she would encourage me like not to take it too seriously, just like, go home and write about, like I'd come in and be writing about some book I read or, like a movie I saw or, whatever I happened to be interested in at that moment. She'd say, well, like, how would you write a song about that? So I think by the time I was a grown up or, even in college and majoring in composition and stuff, I was very familiar with the work of writing music about non-musical stuff and the kind of like using instrumental noises to reflect the experience of things that you wouldn't necessarily initially think to describe that way.
That's so interesting to me because I feel very fortunate that I had a similar experience with my guitar teacher growing up, where he was this. I hear all kinds of stories of people who learn music with very strict teachers or very either formally or strictly classically trained and, have a very disciplinarian approach to music. And I didn't have that experience at all. I had this very sort of music is for the people kind of thing, but not necessarily you're not trading anything away by accepting that. No, and I think I hear some notes of that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I think we probably both had both types of teacher over the course of our lives. Yeah. And I was very lucky that in this particular regard, this early first one was that type. Where, like, I don't know, if you're trying to teach a 5-year-old to appreciate, like what music is and what it can do and why it's exciting, it's better to sort of encourage them to lean into what they enjoy about it rather than like point out what they're doing wrong.
Right, exactly. And what was the first piece you ever wrote?
Oh my God. I wish I could play it for you. I think I still know how it goes. I was 5 and it was called The Flight of the Sparrow, and I didn't know what a sparrow was. I think I had read about it. My music wasn't very good until I was, over 6.
That's reasonable. I think that's maybe an okay,
Yeah, but I mean, I remember the process of writing that. A lot of my like earliest stuff, which is like there's some of my earliest memories. And I remember just being thrilled by like a cool thing about the piano is that unlike, a trumpet or a violin or something, like it's really just if you push a button, like a note is going to happen. You don't have to learn this process of like getting tone and all that stuff. So I remember like it felt like alchemy, right? Like if you play this note and this note at the same time, you get this like crazy effect. And then if you move this just a little bit, it changes it. I remember thinking like noticing like, oh, if I do that, then it sounds like this song I know from this like Disney movie that I just saw, So I remember that being like such an exciting set of discoveries to like, all I have to do is like push these buttons and like this incredible thing happens.
Yeah, it's the greatest form of magic,
Yeah, it's a great invention, a piano. We're lucky to have.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I read a bit about the early days of the piano where, it was a revolution that you could actually, play with a dynamic range of the notes just by velocity, right? And like that, all of a sudden you didn't have to have different layers to do different things.
Yeah, and you can move from one
expressivity.
Yeah, we can move from one tonal range to another without everything going wonky and out of tune. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and the even temper, all that stuff. And maybe we get into some of that stuff because I think there's so much cool stuff where like in that at the intersection between math, geometry, and music, and which I'm sure you must have thought too. In like when you're capturing moments and you're sort of like looking at the composition of a landscape. Mm-hmm. And you're sort of trying to take note of the elements in them, and you're trying to understand the relationships between the things in the stuff. And then some of those numbers reappear in music a lot. And I'm really excited about those numbers. Yeah.
I will say that I think what let me go back to like a thing you mentioned earlier about you were comparing what I do to what like a plein-air painter does, where they sort of like look at a scene and compose it properly, and then they but you use the word capture, which is funny because I don't think that that's necessarily how a painter would describe what I think that's a thing that like what they do and what I do has a bit in common. Like you could have 12 painters look at the same scene and they will render 12 very different paintings. Everybody will see something different, and that goes to like their particular eye or their where they grew up, like what things they notice, like what things are familiar to them and which ones aren't. And that's kind of how it is for me too. Like when I play a song about Kansas, it's never in my head that like here is a definitive portrait of Kansas rendered in music. It's like here's how I would describe what it felt for me one time, this one instance in Kansas. So in that respect, they're kind of more like all of my songs, I think, are a lot more like personal essay or like little nature essays, maybe like discrete stories without any words in them and no narrative, but kind of like trying to not articulate, but I try to articulate like a set of feelings that a landscape might bring out on someone that they might not notice or know how to describe. Like how you might feel kind of like exhilarated on top of a mountain or like uneasy in a big exposed field and disoriented or claustrophobic in a tunnel of trees, that sort of stuff. I feel like these things, like they're such automatic parts of our, existence that they kind of sit in the background all the time and no one tends to think or talk about them. And in that weird way, I find it much easier to like, or much more effective to hit people with like a series, like a sequence of notes that like makes their heart go a certain way or like, draws out a set of emotions. I find that to be a more effective way of representing that landscape experience than sitting here and telling you about how I felt, hot and lonely in the middle of a desert,
No. And I hear your point. So I guess I borrowed that word from photography, right? Which is an interesting, I think we live in a very interesting time because we live in a world where photography is so ubiquitous that we are so used to the idea of the image of something being separate from the thing itself. So, a print of the Mona Lisa is like you know what the Mona Lisa is, even if you've never been to the Louvre, right?
Right.
And so I think that like when thinking about something like a landscape, if you take the photography approach to it, then you're sort of capturing what you could sort of remotely say it's an objective thing. But what you're doing is, I think, more interesting because you're all of a sudden repositioning the subjective experience of the consumer. And you're guiding them through a story told by sound, right?
It's to use a term from your universe, it's generative.
Oh, I will get to that. We'll get to that.
You're right. That is, obviously there's a lot of, there's so many, creative decisions made in photography as well, but you're right. You're sort of like choosing what the camera pulls out and what it doesn't. Whereas like if you're putting paint on a canvas, you're starting from zero and adding. Right. And I guess when I'm writing a song, it is that way.
But there's another layer that I find really interesting about your process is how you've blended your natural predisposition toward music with your natural predisposition toward geography. And where did that come from? Where did the love for geography come from? And how did that, and what was the synthesis between the two?
That's a great question. I've always been like interested in wandering around. Like this is all a bunch of stuff that kind of makes more sense in retrospect. Like throughout my childhood, like my happiest moments were sort of like riding my bikes down like dirt roads in New Hampshire and like seeing where they came out and kind of like building out a mental map where you sort of like slowly find where you are by moving around. And then like, I'd be interested in like local environmental history, like why this mountain looks this way and like why this neighborhood is different from this neighborhood. But I don't think I ever like lumped all that into the same category of I didn't know it was a thing you could study basically. And then I got to college and I went to a liberal arts college. I was very lucky because I could major in music while taking like the bare minimum number of music courses and kind of devoting most of my time to like exploring all this and other stuff I'd be interested in. And I really wound up hunkering for a lot of the time in this sort of like environmental studies, landscape history, built environment studies space where I just grew. I don't know. I was also kind of like living away from where I grew up for the first time. And I was really interested in why, the city I was in school in, looked and felt different from the city next to it or like different from where I grew up or, and there are like concrete explanations for a lot of this. And so anyway, I gradually through some process, like, I don't know, I've always loved maps, like all that stuff. But I think by this point I was kind of, I was pretty firmly a musician. So it was just a process of, and this was familiar to me already because like we were saying, I was used to writing about non-musical stuff, but it was a way of, I had to kind of figure out a way to make my music about or inspired by all this stuff that I knew I was really, really interested in. And there was a lot of trial and error, but I also didn't think it would be like the thing I would do for a decade and a half. I kind of thought, my senior thesis was inspired by, was like drawn from maps of Massachusetts that I like converted into sound in certain ways. Wasn't very good. And then my first year out of college, I made an album that was kind of inspired by the New England landscape. But I kind of thought that would be it. And then the more I traveled around, because now I was starting to play shows, the more time I spent kind of looking at new landscapes and like trying to wrap my head around them, it just became this perfect two-stroke engine of like every new place I went, I wanted to write about it. And I think over time, I became much more thoughtful about it. And I kind of landed pretty quickly on a practice that I feel is sturdy. So, I mean, maybe I'll be bored by landscape at some point, but for now.
But I mean, there's so much ground to cover. So I think that
literally,
yeah, exactly. The thing that I find interesting about your work, Ben, is that so that I think you captured it in the two phrases you said. You said it's a practice because it's sort of it's an engine. It's a two-stroke engine where you have the inspiration to write the next thing in the act of performing the current thing.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that is the dream, man. Like that, and also you're doing you're doing the most fun thing that's ever been, handed down to mankind, which is playing music, right?
I'm lucky in that respect. Yeah. Well, also
that's awesome.
I will say, I do feel lucky in this respect because a lot of my colleagues, the thing that kind of wears them down is all the travel and because in order to make this work, especially these days, where you're not getting a lot of money from album sales and all that stuff, you really do have to be on the road a lot to be solvent.
Yeah.
And that, I know a lot of people who find that really exhausting and they really look forward to getting off the road. And for whatever reason, I just don't feel that way. I feel kind of most animated and most myself. And I'm saved from the phenomenon that happens to a lot of musicians where it all just becomes a blur, right? You're in a new place every day and it's just one thing after another and you never really know where you are. And I never have that problem because I'm sort of obsessively checking out what material they make the roads out of in North Dakota or whatever. I feel very kind of keenly aware of where I am all the time. And that I think helps is a major lucky draw for my mental health anyway, and viability as a traveling performer.
But and I think it also primes your sensitivity to absorb the most salient details of something of a given place that maybe other people don't pay attention to. Things like the materials that make the roads.
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly that turns into something empathetic, right? It turns into a story of the people who made the roads and the families that supported the people who made the roads, and all of a sudden now you're painting a way more subjective, human, relatable story of the place that you're in, which I think is, first of all, just fantastic because we live in such an objectified world, a consumerist world where everything is transactional. It's an object that serves, to further your interests. But I think a practice like this sort of puts you in a position of really opening yourself up to what is the creative value of something like this, and how can I celebrate this stuff, right? I love the idea of the. Go for it.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, I'm a big believer in the value of metaphor as a way for people to see kind of unexpected connections between things. I feel like that's the main thing I'm selling is that it's not necessarily just I was in this cool forest once. It's I'm always just kind of trying to show people, this thing that this place made me feel might not sound like how you would describe that feeling, but it might remind you of what you felt when you were somewhere else or when some other thing happened to you that had nothing to do with landscape. And I just feel like it's a reason I've stuck with landscape as subject matter. One of them is that it is just such a fruitful metaphor for so many other things you want to talk about. I have a whole, several years ago, I wrote a whole album about estuaries that was really just a way for me to write a breakup album in the form that usually takes. And instead of writing about lyrics and all that stuff, I wrote about different types of estuaries and other places where the ground underneath you is sort of unpredictable and changing. So yeah, I like the fact that in order to write about a place, I have to kind of zoom out far enough to see what is it I really want to talk about. It's not just this part's green, this part's blue. It's what is the significance of this story?
Yeah, I'd love to double tap on the idea of the power of metaphor. So I wrote a sci-fi novel inspired by that very thought, right? The power of metaphor to. Sorry, what?
I like the verb double tap in this context. That's very good.
I know. It has many layers to it if you think about it.
Yeah. It's true.
Because I do think I think that there's a special cognitive process that happens when exposed to metaphor that evokes reappraisal of certain things. What you mentioned about you're just say you're composing about a cave, and the sound is not what the listener might expect, but it reminds them of something else. Mm-hmm. And I think I think that process is so fascinating because you're playing with so much stuff that is in the background of that person's psyche, that essentially like connects to very disparate ideas in a way that then you can reuse that connection to inform other things about your life, right? So if you can connect the idea of, say, for example, it's counterintuitive that the cave feels fresh and spacious as opposed to claustrophobic or like whatever. You're playing with the expectation of the listener that a cave is going to be claustrophobic, and all of a sudden it's very different and it feels like home.
Right.
Then, there's a lesson there, right? Like there's the lesson of maybe you can find home in places you don't expect, right? Is there a particular instance of that resonates with you that was particularly meaningful to you as a person that then maybe you turned into art?
Ooh, I can't think of a great example specifically just then, but when you were just talking, it did make me think of, like something I try to like, well, you've seen me play, at all my shows, the way I usually present everything is I tell some story. There's usually a bunch of jokes in it that kind of like sets up the context for the song, but then I kind of get out of the way of it. Like, and it's never, I always kind of hope that people don't feel like they need to listen for exactly the thing I'm talking about in the song. I want them to be able to kind of, I want it to be able to wash over them, and then they can make their own associations with it, and hold mine, at a distance and know like, well, he thought he was writing about, this river, but to me, this is clearly a song about airports, or like a song about, childhood, or, it's important to me that people feel that freedom to connect with my songs on their own terms. So it's like, for instance, in most of my albums, there's always like one essay that sort of contextualizes the whole project and like what, that whole CD is about or whatever. But there's never any kind of like, this song's about this song's about this song's about this. It's very important to me that, people can kind of find areas of commonality within like the thing that I made, and that I didn't even know about or would never have occurred to me.
No, it's awesome because I feel very lucky that I got to see you perform, in the sense that you really do, you present the work for, this comes from this place. Mm-hmm. But then you just play the music, and then it's also very fun to see you transform into someone else as you play the different songs.
Yeah, really exactly one-eyed performance style.
But I had another question that was it's a two-part question. So there's landscapes, which we naturally tend to think of as like beautiful nature views. Right. Like I think of Yosemite probably when like I think of, the quintessential like landscape is like tunnel view in Yosemite. Mm-hmm. But there's other kinds, right? There's like there's New York City cityscape, right? Mm-hmm. And urban, very dense urban areas.
Yeah. Or like a vacant lot in the outskirts of a town. That's a specific type of landscape. Yeah. I think anything on the ground is a landscape.
Yeah, I guess so. And then, but then the I guess the thing that inspired the question was like architecture. Like places, something like La Sagrada Familia, or a place that is designed to evoke. You would be. It's already a concerto of emotion, just the architecture of the place.
Right.
And then you'd sort of riffing on that. Have you done much of that kind of stuff?
Not really. I think I'm always a little bit more interested in like, because as you say, it's already kind of composed, right? It'll be like, there is cool music that is written, directly about architecture or about, like Morton Feldman has that like Rothko Chapel thing he did, but I don't know. It's never. I like the idea of kind of like, well, going back to like one of the things we said earlier. Part of the thing that like a plein air painter would have to do is like take his easel out and then like find a scene. And I think part of the fun for me is doing like the musical equivalent of that, which is like a bit more like what a writer would do than a whatever I am, piano player. But you have to like notice the like combinations of things or weird juxtapositions, and then you're kind of the one who gets to like draw the frame of your camera around it.
I'd love to talk about the process a bit more. Like, how do you have a framework around how do you tackle these compositions? Like, do you collect, do you take photos? Do you record yourself with your reactions? Do you then sit down and mull them over and then sort of like stir them into a pot till, the ice cream begins to take shape? I mean, how do you do it?
I don't record myself. Oh, well, so I kind of, the way I explain this usually is like I go around the world with like two, garbage bags over my shoulder. And then one of them is just full of like stems of musical ideas. Like I'll either, written down or voice memos, whatever, that are just kind of, they're not developed, they're not going anywhere, but like, oh, this like interval is cool. And like, I like this rhythm, this, fragment. That's bag number one. And then the other bag is sort of, as I travel around, I wait to be kind of like, grabbed, usually like vexed or like confused by a place I'm in, or I find that it would be hard to explain to someone else, what it feels like or what it is about it that's affecting me. And then that's usually when I know like, oh, well, I've got to write about this. And so then I take garbage bag number one and kind of like dump all those pieces and then see what I can sort of Lego together to like approximate the effect that I know I want to get from the other thing. So, that's
awesome. Yeah.
And changes a little bit too with each, like I try to kind of, kick the tires of that process and, like rebuild the, frame every time I make a new project. The album that I think I was talking about when my latest one was called Bearings. It came out in October, and that one I wrote very differently. Where I was trying to think of normally a problem with the process that I just described is that normally it takes very long for, like, I'll write a song and then I'll sort of like tweak it and adjust it and like obsess over it for like months and years before I actually record it, by which time I hate it. So I was trying to find a way to like get around that. And then I was also thinking a lot about how I learn and engage with landscapes in real life, which is always by moving around them in some way or another, either by walking or riding a bike or, driving a car. I never feel like I know someplace if I've only seen it from one angle. And the times when I generally feel like I get something is like after I've seen it from 100 different sides and I know it in 3 dimensions, kind of kinetically. And so I thought a way to solve both of these problems at once would be to book a bunch of studio time and then go in for each of these sessions with no music pre-written, but like a notebook full. I make a lot of notes as well. Just a notebook full of like text about with no music stuff written in it, but just about the particular landscapes and places and ideas that I knew I wanted to write about. And then I would have to kind of like find each song by like finding, like moving around the piano the way I'd move around the landscape. So it's much more like high pressure in the studio, but I think that like forced spontaneity really, really served the songs, and it kind of kept me from getting out of my own way. And so it's all this is to say the process is always evolving, and it's slightly different from project to project, but that's where the bones are.
No, I think that's extremely similar to the way that I've written music before, in the sense that, bag one with the little riffs and the little cool musical things that you just find interesting that seem to grow by themselves, like there's a never ending source of those, but
let's hope.
It's a whole, oh yeah, let's hope, please.
Yeah. Don't be too cocky.
But but it's a whole nother thing to put them into context in a place that really highlights the message that they're trying to send. And so going back to the idea before of the practice that you've built, I think like you've found an engine to constantly to place those things into the landscape they belong. And if to someone who doesn't do that, and maybe musically inclined or maybe artistically inclined, let's say poetically inclined, like you come up with a line that moves you, but you don't find the poem for it, or you don't find the essay for it.
Yeah,
you're never gonna get, and nobody ever sees it, and you forget about it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really awesome that there's two layers there, that you're also from a computer science perspective, it's also like the most efficient way to make music, right? Like you have a pool of stuff that you're sort of like constantly, you know the words.
Yeah. That's amazing. I'm going to be, I'm way out in front of my skis already. So, yeah, no, I do feel there's a song on The Trouble with Wilderness that I originally wrote the main musical ingredients on that 10 years earlier. And they just kind of sat, on my hard drive. Like, I have no idea what I'm going to do with this. Doesn't sound like any of my other music. And then finally the right, like animating framework came through. Like it was the best way I could think of to illustrate a song about this. So sometimes it's like that, those little idea germs, there's not any kind of time limit on them. They don't expire. They're like, you can pick one up decades from now and it'll, maybe you'll be better. Maybe I couldn't write that song until it was 10 years later. And I had, picked up, a few other things along the way that would allow me to do it right.
And you could reuse them, right? You could do like a meta leitmotif thing where, the same phrase, takes on different shapes and meanings depending on, the heartbreak motif, and it appears in the cave and appears.
I do that in every one of my albums has maybe not Bearings because it was so written so weirdly, but everything else, there's always some kind of like, Yankee Division, Salt, Field Studies, Wilderness all have like particular like gestures that like reappear in different forms over the course of the album. Even though the songs are all discrete, they're kind of like hung together in this. I like a lot of that's just like personal preference. I like when an album feels like a coherent, stew rather than like, an array of like 12 different things you can.
Yeah, I'm watching the show on Netflix about a music critic, and I think one of the first lines he says is, "Nobody makes albums anymore; it's all singles."
True.
Yeah. True.
Yeah, it's funny. That was a complaint. Like we kind of got a bonus 20 years with like the iTunes store and stuff. With like, I remember when the iTunes store came out in like, 2002 or 3 or whatever that was. Everyone was saying like, oh, like Apple has saved the album because it's just like the way everything was stored. I mean, you could buy one song at a time, but like a lot of people wouldn't. They would just like download the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas like it was teetering on the edge at that time of like, Napster and LimeWire and like a very, very song focused, like environment for music consumption. But now I feel like the way that like streaming models, at least not only to like distribute this stuff, but like, I mean, I guess we're getting into a totally different subject, but the way that they incentivize, constant new releases over like every 2 years, an album comes out. it really, makes it harder to justify, like, why wouldn't you just do, 12 singles over the course of a year than instead of, here's 12 songs all at once. And like the attention economy is so different too. Yeah. It's like,
I was going to say, like, when you were talking, I realized that music was the precursor to something like TikTok, where, it's the discretization of your attention, right? Like it's, you used to buy a long form thing, the whole album. In fact, you couldn't even skip from track to track.
I know.
And then it became the CD, which allowed you to skip from track to track. Mm-hmm. And then, that becomes the clip. It's essentially the same thing that we have today with TikTok, where you have like the, 2-minute clip or something as
a song.
Exactly. And like where, in TikTok, you have the clip of a long form podcast. This kind of the same idea, but consumption really happens in the clips. It's very rare to get people to sit down and listen to other than the giant outliers, it's like a 3-hour episode or something,
Yeah. I know. I kind of wonder about that. Whenever I say, I don't, I feel like this is a topic on which I am, a very old man. Like I don't, TikTok was one of those things where like, it was the first like, oh yeah, this is like not like, this is for people who are not me. And I've never like, I've like tried to like download, making an account a couple times. I can't like make it work. Like, I don't know. I don't understand TikTok. And every time I see a clip, like kind of repeated on another like platform, like someone will like repost on Instagram or Twitter, like one of the ones I understand. It just seems so kind of like frenetic and like decontextualized and like sugary that like I just need a rocking chair in a porch somewhere and like I'll yell at kids to get off my lawn.
Oh man,
this is gonna be the next.
But you just got me thinking. You just got me thinking that like I think your music could do extremely well on TikTok. Because
I would need a coach.
Okay, we'll talk about it after.
It's out. I think it is. My distributor does send it to like it's out. It's on there for people to attach to their stuff. And I think I get some,
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. I don't know what the economics of it are. But
probably good for like exposure and stuff. I know if I were a better businessman, I would have a TikTok account and I would be like cranking it. But
it's a lot of work.
There's no joy in it for me. Like I really love using. I feel like there's someone gave me this advice one time and I'm going to butcher it, but it was like, we were complaining about like, oh, you have to use all these different like social media things. And he said something like I think there's actually, it's important to like only do the ones that you feel like you're putting putting yourself into. And if you're doing it kind of rote and like, you're just kind of like cranking stuff out, like that will be apparent to people. So I use like Instagram a lot because I love taking photographs. And I used to use Twitter a lot more before it went all weird. Cause I like, writing little pieces.
Oh yeah.
And but yeah, no, I think I'm just like not a video person in a weird way. I think maybe
I get that. It
requires more sitting still than I'm I'm willing to do.
Well, and if you think about video, I think there's like, this is a whole different branch of the tree, but like, I think because your music is so landscape focused. I mean, like as you're walking around the place, you take videos of the place. You don't even have to say anything. It's just the video on mute with your music playing in the background. That is.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, you can continue your thought. So
Yeah.
This I know this might be a fun thing to talk about because this is a thing I've considered because it comes up a lot, not necessarily just for this, but for maybe the more like glaring example we could use would be like people often say like, oh, when you perform, what you should do is you should have projected behind you, a video like showing this, like, because then people can like, it's such good I think that I've considered that a lot, and it never feels right to me. And I think there are two reasons. And one is that, I mean, just like practically, I think the music becomes background music very quickly. If you're like, attention is like visuals will always trump audio.
Yeah.
And so if your attention is trained on like a scene panning over a field, you're going to notice that, and you'll be like watching for something to come out of the corner, or you'll be like, and you won't be kind of like dwelling on like the things I want you to be noticing in my music. The other is that, I don't know, for me, this is, I guess, like the harder part to describe. For me, it's very important that people are like using their imaginations, and that I like, well, like we were saying earlier, that they're kind of bringing their own thing to it. And I feel like telling a story about someplace is one thing, because it kind of like gets them on the right path, but they're able to kind of like, they're like, okay, but like, I'll put that in a box and now I'll just listen to the song and see what I think of it. But if there's like a video, you know, being blasted into their face, you know, it's very hard to decouple that audio from those visuals, as you're consuming them both simultaneously.
You are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. I think one of the things that I enjoy the most about what? Yeah, cancel the whole idea. I mean, no, because I was going to say, like, with the songs that you played at Alan and Maki's wedding, well, I think Salt was the first one you played, and mm-hmm. I don't have a visual idea of what the salt flats look like, right? So mm-hmm. I'm working with nothing. So right. It was essentially like I had to build an experience out of the sounds that you were playing, and it was the first song where I was like, these sounds I know. Like, I know what this story is saying because I connected it to so much of my life.
Yeah.
And so then I built an experience around that. And then when you played this Rush of Beauty, The Sense of Order, that, you know, and you prefaced it by saying it's about a garden. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as the tempo begins, I'm getting excited to see the little plants grow and everybody working really hard to make sure the garden is like all cute and perfect.
Yeah. Or like, yeah, cool. And that to me is like, that's what I want an audience to be doing, is like working with me rather than like consuming. You know, like it feels like more of a conversation than it would if I just kind of came out and said like, all right, everybody sit back and then like hit them with 45 minutes of, video footage of reeds.
I would like to talk a little bit about the elements that you use in your music, because I think that there's, I was really struck by the elements that you use in terms of structure, in terms of, like, as in song structure, composition elements, the way you blend rhythms, the way you blend melodic structures. And I wanted to sort of like begin that part of the conversation by asking, okay, which elements do you enjoy playing with the most?
Ooh. I think the answer to that is, I mean, it's different. It changes from song to song and certainly from project to project. But most often, I think the thing I get most excited about is texture. I really like, in making a record, I really like the work of kind of like finding like unexpected combinations of sounds and stuff like that. And then in like preparing something for like playing it on solo piano, I think a piano is an amazing instrument for, it seems like, you know, you push a button and like the same kind of thing happens, but you can make a piano sound like 100 different things. And like on my last few albums, I've treated the pianos with like fabric and felt and metal and like trying to make it sound different and novel. Or even just like the difference between like, you know, a flurry of arpeggios like puts you in a different headspace than, you know, like big stately chords does. And I love, I like finding new things a piano can sound like and using those.
That's so cool. I was wondering from the performance how much of it was intentional or how much was an artifact of the setup. But I remember the experience of in Salt when it after the opening and you hit the bass chord and it's just barely distorted and it's just a little bit of overdrive and I'm like, yes, this is the good stuff because it's a little bit of that. I think that's where like the edgy side of the piano is, where you're pushing it into a different place.
I also
and I'm extremely glad that's part of.
And on that song,
you do.
I punch it. It's a friendly violence between me and my my significant other keyboard.
This segment of the no, just kidding. And I noticed, and I noticed you use a lot of dynamic range too, like the loudness of the, which I guess like texture captures a lot, right? Texture captures
that goes to texture. It's. When I first started playing out a lot, so I didn't when I like emerged into the world after college. I would not have introduced myself as a piano player. I think I would have said I was a multi-instrumentalist, and I had been like most of what I studied was composition and arrangement, and I kind of thought that I would be like a studio guy, like a producer, or a someone who'd write arrangements, or I'd go on tour and I'd play like trumpet and like extra stuff for a band or whatever. And a lot of my recordings were like, they were not piano music. It was like instrumental, but like very like lush and lots of different things going on. And my early shows where like I'd go out with a loop pedal and an acoustic guitar and a band and like the whole thing. And it was just so, impossible for me to be present in those shows because I was so worried about like some technology going wrong or, and I kind of like gradually boiled down into just like, I just play piano. And a thing I love, because I still like on my records, there's other instruments, but I love the project of taking a song you've written and like figuring out how to like, all right, all I've got is like 88 buttons and like, how can I pull from them exactly the sounds I need to render this song, and no more, like I don't even change the, like, obviously when you're playing an acoustic piano, you can't change much about it. But, even when I'm playing my keyboard, I try to limit myself to like a particular piano setting that I've like dialed in over years. But I work well with limitation. I think if you give me too many options, I start to panic. Oh
man. So my journey is kind of similar, I think, but I never made it to the point of compression. So I went from acoustic guitar to electric guitar to effects pedals to synthesizers. And then that is infinity, that is there. You can get lost. But it's also great fun, right? Because you're talking about texture, right? Like you're literally defining texture at the unit of sound that you can imagine. Right.
And there are still like helpful limitations, and even just in like how you interface with a synthesizer, you're still philosophically on the same side.
I mean, no, totally. I mean, no, but what I guess I was saying that like constraints are actually helpful. I think creativity only happens under constraints. I think if you don't have any constraints, then why do you need to create anything? Like everything is there. But and then I was going to geek out a little bit about, okay, so given the fact that you very much identify as a piano player, what's your favorite kind of piano to play? Do you like a, grand, baby grand?
Ooh, good question. It depends on the context. Some pianos are right for some rooms and not right for others. And I certainly I can't speak to like, one brand over another, that kind of thing.
No.
Yeah. I generally like since the rooms I like playing in are usually usually about the size, of the one that you saw me in at the museum for the wedding. I like a kind of like intimate space. So I'd like a baby grand piano is like about what I like to do. There's a place around here that I've played that has it's a small theater, like in a converted church, but it has like a 9-foot concert grand, which is just like way too much piano for that room. So you just feel like you're driving a like 18-wheeler down a like side street. It can be just like a bit more sound than you need, but I don't know. I feel loyalty dictates that I should shout out my keyboard as well, because I've had the same keyboard for 14 years this month. I played it like every night. I love it. It's a Korg SV1. It is, for my money, the perfect keyboard for what I do. It's got, the ability to make like a few kooky sounds that I use a lot when I play with bands and stuff. But, I really use it for, like, I just love the pianos that it's got loaded in there. And you can tweak enough to, make it fit the space you need, but you don't have so much control that you can get lost in the weeds. So maybe not.
Yeah,
for
that's amazing.
It is exactly the right keyboard for me, and they don't make it anymore. So I'm like,
a 14-year relationship with anything is a long relationship.
It's my longest relationship.
No, that's awesome, man. And okay, I have a couple more points that I want to talk about. One of them is like the industry and the courage required to embrace the life of a creative. I think that I'm really inspired by people who find their calling, their engine, like their thing, and then live by it. This is what I do. So first of all, I greatly commend you for that.
Oh, thanks.
I want to unpack a little bit the thinking behind the doing. So like, how did you get into the headspace of, okay, this is what I want to do, and I commit to it?
I think, it was a pretty natural step for me. I just because I'd always done something kind of like this. And then, always had in the background, like even as I was in school and stuff, I was still kind of like writing and recording, not performing as much. Like the performing kind of like really ramped up in my 20s. Now it's like, that's 95% of what I do. But I think that's one answer. It's like, why would I stop doing that? Like, I might as well like try it out and see how far I can go. But I think the logical rationale was, I knew I wanted to do something that could be an engine that I could kind of turn on, like knowing that I would keep having new experiences and interests. I didn't want to choose a field that would be where my role in it would be very like narrowly defined. And I do feel like a lucky thing about being like a guy who wanders around and like writes songs about the stuff he thinks is cool, is so perfect. It's so open-ended, and I've been able to, it's been 15 years, and I've gone through like a lot of different phases of my life during that time, and it's never felt irrelevant to my life. Like my career and my personal life are, they cannot be disaggregated. They're 100% the same thing. And I think that sounds like spun the wrong way, that sounds like a terrible work-life balance, but I think it's a good one.
I think it's the best. It's work that doesn't feel like work. It's work that feels like life. I think that like if there are, I think that there's like an underlying issue there that I think we have in the modern world, that we've assumed that work means the corporate ladder 9-to-5 style work. When that, I don't know that is the case necessarily. Work is anything that you apply effort to. It's more like occupation. right? And all of a sudden that is very different. It has a very different connotation than a job, right?
Right.
And I think that I've been really inspired by people who are bold in their convictions to living out that life. And I think part of the reason why I was so excited to talk to you was because I think that you're a perfect example of this, but also because of your subject matter, right? And I think the other broad theme that I guess I'm trying to cover in this podcast series, where I talk to people with very different expertises in different things.
I was a bit astonished when you asked me to be interviewed. Are you? Yeah.
Oh, no. But here's maybe the thing that gives it away is that I think what I'm really exploring is the preservation of our humanity in the age of AI. And that means talking about cognitive science. It means talking about philosophy. It means talking about the arts. It means talking about all these other things because they make us uniquely human. And it's all people who've devoted their lives to something out of a human need, right? And in a world where I think things are going to change very drastically and very rapidly. And these will be the things that connect us, right? These will be the things that if we solidify, we'll make it. And if we don't, then, well, it'll be a different story, right? Which leads me to the second part of that little interlude, which is, have you played with any of the generative AI music stuff?
No. I guess I think as established during our TikTok conversation, I'm 92 years old. So I have like I think more than the usual like healthy skepticism about stuff like this. Particularly, I don't know, like AI freaks me out for the reasons that you might expect, someone with my job to do, where like I did an interview yesterday, actually, very much like this. I was sitting exactly here with another program. They surprised me at the end by like, apparently the question they asked all their guests is like, why is art important? And I had like gun to my head. I had to like come up with like 3 sentences about like what the answer to that is. And what I pulled out of nowhere that I think is truly my answer is like, art is important because it's like a way to see inside another person's mind, and not necessarily what they want to present to you either. Like people read things out of my songs that I don't even know are there. And it's, I feel very lucky to participate in this, this ritual where I like create a thing and then like give it to, a room full of people, and each one of them can kind of like find moments of resonance between their brain and soul and mine. And then we all kind of leave feeling closer to each other. And that can't be replicated by, like the most sophisticated algorithm, like it's not coming. If it's not coming from like the mind of a creator, then it's not going to be able to achieve that. You know what I mean? Like people will find things in it, like it is already able to do like things that you can sort of like images that you can stare at for hours and like, like music. But there's something that rings hollow about it to me. And I wonder if that's because of how I feel about it philosophically, or if there's just something empty. What do you think?
So I think about this a lot, and I think there's 2 threads in my mind. The first one is I think the way it is now, these AI tools are still tools. So they're still the product of somebody prompting them the right way. You still have a human that is deciding to play that instrument in a certain way and then deciding to share that. So it still comes from the mind of the prompter to some degree. Yeah. And it automates some of the crafty parts of art, the final mastering details, like in the album where you're trying to level set everything so it sounds the same. Like there is a degree to which that is artistic, and there is a degree to which that is just work. And so then I'm not so sure what the issue is with the tool, right? It's almost like saying you can't use virtual instruments in music, right? You can't use or something like that. So that's one side of it. And then also this comes from having played with the tools myself and being surprised at the quality of the output, right? Like shocked at the quality of the output. The second half of it is, but what if we're approximating a mind, right? Mm-hmm. And that one is even weirder, right? That one's even stranger because like, where to even begin to unpack the fact that we can have an artistic relationship with a non-human thing. And I think that I've had the conversation about the value of AI for art a lot with different people. A lot of artists have this healthy skepticism because I think it really gets at this fundamental human thing. It almost feels like an encroaching of our sovereign territory. Like we were given the luxury, we're the only animals that make art. Why should anybody else get in there? But I think, I don't know. I think I'm landing toward a position where these tools will enable us to create new kinds of artistic experiences that will still be human driven and for humans to consume. That will just be different. And I think they will be slightly more interactive. And I think that will be that there will be participatory. I think it will allow non-creators to feel like creators and maybe give them the taste of what creativity could be. And so there's that component too. I think the state of the tools today is like, say for instance, one of these like udo.com or suno.com. You give it a prompt, it spits out a 2-minute song. And it's a decent song. Like it's kind of insane that in like 20 seconds it spits out something like that, but it's not great.
Yeah. But I mean, the fact that it can do that at all is amazing.
It's hard to fathom, right? I think that like if you then track the progress of how these things have been evolving and where they can go, and as you allow people to customize parts. So for instance, one of the things is like with these music generators, you give it a song and it spits out an audio file. So you can't really do too much editing. You may like, the melody, but you may not like the synth in the background. It's very hard to then do something like, remove the synths. But I mean, as you say, imagine I'm sure that is something that will change with time, like that as they get more sophisticated. That'll be. But yeah, that also gets into I know that this is something that much smarter people than I am are talking about. Like, how do you deal with like copyright law, and how do you claim authorship for a thing that you like? Yeah, tricky. And it's super tricky, and I think. Well, I don't even think we figured out copyright right for the previous generations of information technology. I don't think we figured out copyright for books. Yeah, and all these PR campaigns around AI art not compensating artists is like, well, if who's filing the suits? It's the labels. It's not the artists, And so like.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of being a devil's advocate because it's fun for me to lean into my natural cranky old man persona here. But I do that. I also have a bit of a healthy distrust of efficiency. do you know what I mean? Like there's a you were saying about ideally what these tools will be used for is what do you call the crafty aspects of stuff, like the mastering was the example you used. But I feel like there's also such value to be gained by like mastering is such a sophisticated process, and people have to train for years to like get their ears able to hear stuff properly. And it's impossible that in the process of attaining that skill, they don't learn how to do other things or like bring nuances to that work that they wouldn't, know to do otherwise. It's like my best friend is, he lives in New Hampshire. He's a chair maker. He makes, Windsor chairs, by hand. He doesn't use any power tools. He's like sits on the horse and like shaves down all the parts. And you can get a chair much faster than Charlie can make one, but like he makes better chairs, No,
and I agree. And I think that I actually think that if I game it out to what I think will happen is that there will be so much stuff out there that it'll be impossible to filter out the good stuff from the bad stuff. And or like, as in a priori, I won't trust my feed to curate this for me. It'll end up becoming a lot more relational, as in like, I will trust my friend's opinion about what is good. And it'll actually circle back to in-person, in real life experiences. And I think like it'll be sort of like this thing where it'll be such a power law distribution that like the people who figure out AI art well will be the next generation of Disney. But even Disney, there's a very different kind of movie that you go see, an Avengers film versus an indie film about, a French romance, something like that, right?
Right. I know. Well, this is, I'm sure that we're not the first to break ground in this line of thought, but it's just hard for me to comprehend that a thing whose, what am I trying to say? It's like built on the ability to like consume everything and then like spit out something that is like that. How will that make surprising things? Like if you have a computer watch every movie, good and bad, and say like, give me a movie, won't it be kind of a like rote, like here, it'll like follow the template of whatever you ask it to do. It won't like subvert your expectations, and it won't.
So I've been really interested in this question because our brains do something similar, right? Our brains are integrating information from all of our sensory experiences and somehow creating something new out of them, right? Yep. And so then there's the question of, we don't know how the machine would be able to do it, but we don't know how we do it ourselves. And also our minds have the ability, and the computers have, or I guess these AI models have the ability to do really weird things when you ask it for something. If I prompt you with the following question, like say something unexpected. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Your brain will come up with something unexpected. And so like it there's like all these weird like little neural pathways that I think enable just sort of like it's calculating the likelihood of something, and it'll propose something that is unlikely. And so I don't know. I like it to be super frank, like this whole thing is very disconcerting to me. I don't know that I'm super pro or super anti. I think I want to have an optimistic outlook toward it, because I think there's such a behemoth of economics and social change and capitalism and just this giant machine that is racing toward this thing, that I think that if we figure out a way to be aligned with it and find beauty in it and be able to create or co-create with it, I think that sets us up for a much less tense, new era. But then I don't know what that does to my bigger human question of like, okay, but what was it about us that made us special?
Well, I was just thinking about like, maybe to bring it full circle a little bit, like if I were to just taking, for instance, like what I do, luckily I feel like I'm safe for a little while in this one respect, because like I'm sure that like within a couple years, you probably will be able to say like computer, make a song that sounds like Ben Cosgrove. You could probably do that right now, actually, and it would be like not probably. That bad. But I do think that like enough of my process involves experiencing something in one department of my brain that has nothing to do with music, and then like zooming out into the most human part of me, like kind of like sitting with a feeling and analyzing it and trying to decide how to like spit it out using a different language. That I feel it is nice. It makes me feel proud to be a human to know that like if you told a computer to say like, well, like what do you feel like in a field, and then like how would you write piano music about that? That like I would do a better job than it could. Because it doesn't know what it feels like to be in a field.
And to add more to that, I think that I think it'll just highlight the value of your actual human experience having lived it. Mm-hmm. The same with your friend, it just changes the market that you're serving, right? Like, so your friend who makes chairs, probably won't be able to compete with an IKEA chair on price.
Exactly.
Right. But that's not even the game you're playing, right? Like all of a sudden you're presenting something very different, right? And it's a premium on the fact that you're a human with a life that has chosen to spend it this way. And I think that type of stuff is the thing that'll be the most valuable, because I think the next generation won't get that. Yeah,
that is encouraging. Because it's true. Yeah, like they're I'm just thinking about like there are certain, like we live in a world where there are already a lot of like there are hundreds of thousands of people who can play piano better than I can, but I feel like fundamentally what I'm offering people is not like listen to this amazing piano player. It's like listen to what this piano player has to say.
No, and I think that's actually maybe that is a great analogy, because it's not a technicality. It's not a technical competition, right? It's not like how fast can you play Chopin. It's like wait a minute. No, but back to the same idea. It's a different thing, right? Like it's a very different thing. And God bless them with the perfect, like everything, and just like, and then they go crazy, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
I enjoy watching those videos.
I'll be happy to see them squirm a bit. That'll be.
But it's a very different thing, right? I think that there will still be spaces for that, where like human excellence can still shine. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's going to be a crazy ride, man. It's going to be a crazy ride.
Well, I'll be keeping your number on deck so that you can reassure me as we
you do
into this world.
For sure. Ben, this was great. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated talking to you.
Sincerely,
I really appreciate your music.
Oh, well, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. Please keep doing it. And I hope we cross paths again soon. It's really, really nice to meet you. And thank you again for having me for this chat.
Yeah, you got it.